The stagecoach rattled into Victor, Colorado on a blistering July afternoon in 1882, carrying a young woman whose entire life had just crumbled to dust behind her. Rose Garrison pressed her forehead against the window, watching the mining town emerge from the mountain landscape like something carved from desperation and determination. Her hands trembled in her lap, clutching a small cloth bag that contained everything she owned in this world, which amounted to 2 dresses, a hairbrush, and a locket with her mother's picture inside. The rest had been claimed by creditors after her father's death 3 months prior, when the bank had seized their Philadelphia home along with every stick of furniture, every book, every memory. She was 22 years old, unmarried and utterly alone. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the Wells Fargo office, and Rose stepped down onto the dusty street, her traveling dress already coated in a fine layer of grit, despite her best efforts to stay clean. Victor bustled with activity even in the oppressive heat. Miners trudged past with lunch pails, prospectors examined equipment outside the general store, and somewhere in the distance, the rhythmic pounding of stamp mills crushing ore echoed through the mountain air. This was a town built on gold, on the desperate hope that lay beneath tons of rock and earth. Rose had come here because her father's distant cousin, a woman named Margaret Prout, had reluctantly agreed to take her in after receiving Rose's desperate letter. The arrangement was temporary. Margaret had written back, and Rose would be expected to earn her keep. Rose had agreed to everything without hesitation because the alternative was destitution on the streets of Philadelphia, and she would not let herself fall that far. She asked directions from a passing woman and made her way down Bennett Avenue, past saloons and boarding houses, toward the modest residential area where Margaret supposedly lived. The July sun beat down mercilessly, and Rose felt sweat trickling down her back beneath her corset. Philadelphia had been hot in summer, but nothing compared to this thin mountain air and relentless sunshine. Margaret Prout's house turned out to be a small clapboard structure that had seen better days, its paint peeling and its front steps sagging slightly. Rose knocked, her heart hammering, and waited. When the door finally opened, a thin woman in her 50s peered out, her face lined with hardship and suspicion. "Rose Garrison?" Margaret asked. "Yes, madam. Thank you so much for taking me in. I cannot express how grateful I am." Margaret looked her up and down with an expression that suggested gratitude was fine, but it would not pay for food or lodging. "Come in, then. We need to discuss arrangements." The interior of the house was dim and cramped, furnished with the bare minimum. Margaret led Rose to a small kitchen table and sat down heavily, gesturing for Rose to do the same. "I will be plain with you, girl. I am a widow living on what my husband left me, which is not much. I can give you a roof over your head for 1 month, maybe 2 if you stretch it. After that, you need to find work or find a husband, preferably both." Rose's throat tightened, but she nodded. "I understand. I will start looking for work immediately." Work for a woman in Victor is either cooking, cleaning, laundry, or working in one of the saloons, and I will not have you doing that last one while you are under my roof," Margaret said firmly. "There is also the possibility of finding a husband. You are young and not unpleasant to look at. A miner with a claim might want a wife." The directness of it stung, but Rose kept her composure. "I will do whatever is necessary." "Good. You can sleep in the back room. It is small, but it is clean. Supper is at 6. I expect you to help with cooking and cleaning while you are here." "Of course." Rose carried her small bag to the back room, which was indeed tiny, barely large enough for the narrow bed and washstand it contained. She sat on the bed and allowed herself one moment of despair, covering her face with her hands. Then she straightened her spine, smoothed her dress, and went to help Margaret prepare supper. Self-pity would not save her. Only action would. The next morning, Rose began her search for employment. She visited the boarding houses first, asking if they needed help with cooking or laundry. Most turned her away, already fully staffed or unable to afford additional help. The general store had no positions available. The bakery had just hired someone. By noon, Rose's feet ached and her spirits had begun to sink. She was walking back toward Margaret's house when she noticed a man struggling with a large crate outside a shop with a sign that read Crawford Freight and Supply. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. He wore working clothes, a chambray shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing muscled forearms, and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head. As Rose watched, the crate tilted dangerously, and without thinking she hurried forward. "Let me help," she said, reaching for the corner of the crate. The man looked startled but did not refuse. "Appreciate it. On three. 1, 2, 3. Together they lifted, and Rose felt the muscles in her arms protest as they maneuvered the heavy crate through the doorway and into the shop. Inside, the space was packed with goods, everything from mining equipment to household supplies, sacks of flour, coils of rope, and tools of every description. "Much obliged," the man said, wiping sweat from his forehead. He had gray eyes, she noticed, clear and direct. "That crate has been giving me trouble for 10 minutes. "I was glad to help," Rose said. Then, seizing the opportunity, she added, "I do not suppose you need any help here. I am looking for work." He studied her for a moment, taking in her dress, her hands that were soft despite her recent hardships, her educated way of speaking. "You do not look like you have done much freight work." "I have not," Rose admitted. "But I am a quick learner and I work hard. I can keep books if you need that. I had a good education. I can also cook and clean, though I know that is not what you do here." "Xavier Crawford," he said, extending his hand. "I own this place. Rose Garrison." She shook his hand, noting the calluses and strength in his grip. "Where are you from, Miss Garrison?" "That accent is not from around here. Philadelphia. I came to live with a relative, but I need to find work quickly." Xavier leaned against the counter, considering. "I could use help with the books, actually. My handwriting is terrible, and I am behind on invoicing. But I cannot pay much, and the work is only part-time right now. Maybe 15 hours a week. It was not much, but it was something. I will take it. Do not you want to know what it pays first?" "Whatever it is, I need it," Rose said honestly. "I am not in a position to be particular." Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a softening around his eyes. 75 cents a day for the hours you work. Come in tomorrow morning and I will show you what needs doing." Relief flooded through Rose so intensely she felt dizzy. "Thank you, Mr. Crawford. I will be here. I promise you will not regret this." "We will see about that," he said, but there was no unkindness in his tone. 9 o'clock sharp. Rose practically floated back to Margaret's house. It was not enough money to live on permanently, but it was a start, a foothold. Margaret received the news with a skeptical sniff, but said at least Rose was making an effort. That night, Rose lay in her narrow bed and thought about Xavier Crawford. There had been something reassuring about him, a steadiness that made her feel less adrift. She pushed the thought away. She could not afford to develop foolish notions about the first man who had shown her kindness. She needed to focus on survival. The next morning, Rose arrived at Crawford Freight and Supply at precisely 9 o'clock, wearing her second dress, which was slightly less worn than the first. Xavier was already there, stacking bags of flour with the easy strength of someone accustomed to physical labor. "Morning," he said. "Ready to tackle my disaster of a ledger?" "I am." He led her to a small office in the back of the shop, really just a partitioned corner with a desk, chair, and filing cabinet. The desk was indeed covered in a chaos of papers, receipts, and invoices. A thick ledger lay open, its pages filled with cramped, barely legible handwriting. "I know it is bad," Xavier said, sounding almost embarrassed. "I am better with my hands than with a pen." "It is not so terrible," Rose lied diplomatically. "I will have this organized in no time. I will be out front if you need anything." Rose rolled up her sleeves, figuratively speaking, and dove into the work. It was immediately clear that Xavier Crawford was actually quite good at his business. The numbers were all there, the calculations correct, but the presentation was a mess. She began by sorting the loose papers into categories, then carefully transcribing everything into a new ledger she found in the drawer, her handwriting neat and precise. The work was absorbing, and Rose lost herself in it, grateful for the distraction from her worries. When Xavier appeared with a cup of coffee for her around 11, she looked up in surprise. "Thought you might need this," he said. "You have been working steady for 2 hours." "Thank you." She accepted the coffee gratefully. "Your business is doing well, Mr. Crawford." "Better than this mess of papers would suggest. Call me Xavier. And yeah, Victor is growing fast. Lots of mines opening up, lots of people needing supplies." He leaned against the door frame. "What brought you out here from Philadelphia, if you do not mind my asking? That is a long way to come." Rose hesitated, then decided honesty was simpler than inventing a story. "My father died and left debts. Everything was sold to pay them. I had a distant cousin here who agreed to take me in temporarily, but I need to make my own way." "That is rough. I am sorry." "It is what it is." "I am grateful to have work now. You have people back in Philadelphia, friends, family." "Some friends, but no one close enough to impose on. My mother died when I was 16. It was just my father and me after that." The familiar ache squeezed her chest, but she kept her voice steady. Xavier nodded slowly. "I know something about being on your own. I came out here 5 years ago with nothing but a wagon and determination, built this business from scratch." "Where did you come from originally?" "Missouri." "My parents had a farm, but when they died, my older brother inherited everything. He made it clear there was no place for me there, so I headed west." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "Best decision I ever made, actually. Out here, a man can make something of himself if he is willing to work for it." "Or a woman," Rose added. Xavier's mouth quirked in a small smile. "Or a woman," he agreed. "Though I will admit it is harder for a woman." "That is an understatement." They looked at each other for a moment, a understanding passing between them, two people who had been forced to rebuild their lives from nothing. Then Xavier pushed off from the door frame. "I will let you get back to it. Let me know if you need anything." Rose returned to her work, but she found her mind wandering to Xavier Crawford. There was something appealing about his straightforwardness, his lack of pretension. And he was handsome, though she tried not to dwell on that. She could not afford distractions, especially romantic ones. Over the following weeks, Rose settled into a routine. She worked at Crawford Freight 3 days a week, slowly bringing order to Xavier's business records. The rest of her time she spent helping Margaret around the house and looking for additional work. She picked up laundry from a few miners, which brought in a little extra money, though it meant her hands were constantly red and raw from the harsh soap and scrubbing. Xavier was an easy man to work for. He never hovered or micromanaged, trusting her to do the job she had been hired for. Sometimes he would bring her coffee or water, and they would talk for a few minutes. She learned that he was 26, that he loved this wild mountain country despite its harshness, that he had ambitions to expand his business as Victor continued to grow. He learned that she missed Philadelphia sometimes, the culture and refinement of it, but that she was determined to make a life here, that she had no intention of giving up or going back east in defeat. There was an easiness between them that surprised Rose. She had not expected to find friendship in this rough mining town, certainly not with a man. But Xavier treated her with respect, never making improper advances or suggestions, and she found herself looking forward to the days she worked at his shop. One afternoon in late August, Rose was working on the books when she heard raised voices from the front of the shop. She set down her pen and listened. "I am telling you, Crawford, you are charging too much," a man's voice said, aggressive and slurred. "I can get the same supplies from Johnson for less." "Then go to Johnson," Xavier replied calmly. "No one is forcing you to buy from me. You think you are so smart, do not you, coming in here taking business from folks who have been here longer? I think you have been drinking, Harlan, and I think you should come back when you are sober." There was a crashing sound, and Rose hurried to the doorway. A stocky, red-faced man had swept a display of goods onto the floor and was advancing on Xavier with his fists clenched. Xavier stood his ground, his expression hard. "Get out," Xavier said, his voice deadly quiet. "Make me." The man swung, but Xavier was faster. He caught the man's arm, twisted, and in one smooth motion had him turned around with his arm pinned behind his back. "I said get out. If you come back here drunk again, I will have the sheriff lock you up." He marched the man to the door and shoved him out into the street. Harlan stumbled, caught himself, and turned back with a snarl. "This is not over, Crawford." "Yes, it is." Xavier shut the door firmly and stood there for a moment, his shoulders tense. Then he turned and saw Rose standing in the doorway of the office, her eyes wide. "Sorry you had to see that," he said, his voice returning to its normal tone. "Harlan gets mean when he drinks. Are you all right?" "I am fine. This is not the first time I have had to throw someone out." He began picking up the scattered goods. Rose came forward to help him. "Does that happen often?" "Often enough. Running a business in a mining town, you get all types. Most folks are decent, but there are always a few troublemakers." He righted a display of lanterns. "You do not need to worry, though. I would not let anyone bother you." The protectiveness in his tone made something warm bloom in Rose's chest. She told herself it was just gratitude, nothing more. But when she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep in the late summer heat, she found herself thinking about Xavier's gray eyes, the way he had handled that drunk man with such controlled strength, the way he always made sure she had everything she needed. She was beginning to care for him, she realized, with a mixture of pleasure and alarm. That was dangerous. She could not afford to let her feelings run away with her. September brought cooler weather and a new problem. Margaret called Rose into the kitchen one evening with a serious expression. "I am going to be blunt with you, Rose. It has been 2 months, and while you are bringing in some money, it is not enough to cover your expenses here. I cannot afford to keep you much longer unless things change." Rose had known this was coming, but hearing it still made her stomach clench. "I understand. I will find more work, I promise." "Or," Margaret said, her tone softening slightly, "you could do what most women in your position do, find a husband. There are plenty of men in this town who need wives. You are young and educated. You could do worse than a miner with a decent claim." The thought of marrying a stranger for purely practical reasons made Rose feel ill, but she knew Margaret was not wrong. It was what women did when they had no other options. "I will think about it." "Do not think too long. I can give you until the end of the month, 2 weeks. Rose had 2 weeks to figure out how to survive. She said nothing to Xavier about her deadline, but she must have seemed distracted because he asked if everything was all right. She assured him it was, not wanting to burden him with her problems. But that night, As she walked back to Margaret's house through the cooling mountain air, she felt the weight of her situation pressing down on her. She was passing a boarding house when a man stepped out of the shadows. Rose's heart leaped into her throat, and she stepped back quickly. "Easy there," the man said, holding up his hands. "Did not mean to startle you. You are Rose Garrison, are not you?" "I am." Rose kept her distance, wary. "Name's Thomas Fletcher. I have seen you around town. I have been meaning to introduce myself." He was perhaps 35, with a weathered face and work-roughened hands. Not unpleasant looking, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made her uncomfortable. "It is nice to meet you, Mr. Fletcher, but I really must be going." "Wait a minute. I heard you might be looking for a husband." He said it bluntly, without finesse. "I've got a good claim up Gold Mountain, pulling out decent ore. I could use a wife to keep house." Rose's cheeks burned. Was her desperation so obvious that strangers were approaching her on the street? "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Fletcher, but I am not interested. You might want to reconsider. A woman on her own in a town like this, that is a hard road. I am offering you security. And I am declining. Good evening." Rose hurried past him, her heart pounding. She heard him call after her, something about her being foolish, but she did not turn around. When she reached Margaret's house, she went straight to her room and sat on the bed, shaking. Was this what her life had come to? Being propositioned by strangers who saw her as a convenient housekeeper. The humiliation of it burned, but what choice did she have? Margaret's deadline loomed. Unless something changed dramatically in the next 2 weeks, Rose would be homeless. And then what? She had heard stories about women who ended up in the cribs, selling themselves to survive. She would rather die than let herself fall that far. The next day at the shop, Rose tried to focus on her work, but her worry must have shown because Xavier kept glancing at her with concern. Finally, around midday, he came into the office and sat on the edge of the desk. "All right, what is wrong?" He asked directly. "You have been jumpy all morning." "It is nothing, I am fine." "Rose," he said her name gently, "talk to me." And somehow, maybe because she was tired of carrying the burden alone, or maybe because Xavier had become the closest thing to a friend she had in Victor, the whole story came spilling out. Margaret's deadline, her failed job search, Thomas Fletcher's crude proposal the night before. Xavier's expression darkened as she talked. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You are not going to marry some stranger just for a roof over your head." "I might not have a choice." "There is always a choice." He stood up, paced to the window, and stared out at the street. "How much would you need to get your own place?" "A room somewhere. I do not know. More than I have, certainly. Even if I could afford a room, I would need more work to keep it." Xavier turned back to her, his jaw set in a determined line. "Work for me full-time. I will pay you $1 a day. That is enough to cover a room and meals." Rose stared at him. "Xavier, you do not need full-time help. I have already organized everything." "Then we will find other things for you to do. Help with inventory, serve customers, whatever needs doing. I mean it, Rose. I will not stand by and watch you be forced into a marriage you do not want." The offer was so generous, so unexpected, that Rose felt tears spring to her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Xavier looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Because I care about what happens to you," he said quietly. "Because you deserve better than being someone's unpaid housekeeper. Because—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "Because it is the right thing to do." There had been something else he almost said. Rose was certain of it, but she did not push. "I do not know how to thank you. No need for thanks, just say you will do it." "Yes." The relief was overwhelming. "Yes, thank you. I will work harder than you can imagine. I promise." "I know you will." He smiled, and Rose felt that warm bloom in her chest again, stronger this time. True to his word, Xavier increased her hours immediately. Rose found herself at the shop 6 days a week, and he invented tasks to keep her busy when the bookkeeping ran out. She learned to do inventory, to serve customers, to handle the heavy goods when necessary. It was hard work, but honest work, and she was grateful for every minute of it. With her increased wages, Rose was able to rent a small room above the bakery. It was tiny, just space for a bed and a washstand, but it was hers. Margaret seemed simultaneously relieved and slightly disapproving when Rose moved out, but Rose did not care. For the first time since her father's death, she had a measure of independence. October arrived, bringing cold nights and the first hints of the brutal winter that was coming. Rose settled into her new life, finding a rhythm that felt almost sustainable. She worked at the shop during the day, did laundry in the evenings to supplement her income, and on Sundays she allowed herself to rest. She and Xavier had fallen into an easy partnership at the shop. He handled the heavy work and deliveries, while she managed the books, served customers, and kept everything organized. They worked well together, often anticipating each other's needs without having to speak. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, their relationship began to shift from friendship into something deeper. It was in the small things. The way Xavier's hand would brush hers when he handed her something. The way his eyes would linger on her face. The way he always made sure she had a warm coat when she left at the end of the day. Rose found herself watching for him in the mornings, her heart lifting when she saw him unlocking the shop. She noticed details about him that she had not before. The small scar on his left hand, the way his hair curled slightly when it got too long, the rare but devastating smile that transformed his serious face. She was falling in love with him. She realized one crisp October morning as she walked to work. The recognition both thrilled and terrified her. Xavier had saved her from desperation, had given her a chance to build a life, but she had no idea if his feelings matched hers. What if she was imagining the tension between them? What if his kindness was just that, kindness, and nothing more? She resolved to keep her feelings to herself. She could not risk making things awkward when he was the only thing standing between her and destitution. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. It happened on a Tuesday in mid-October. Rose was alone in the shop, Xavier having gone to the freight depot to check on a shipment. A well-dressed couple came in, clearly new to Victor, looking around with the slightly dazed expression of people not used to frontier life. "Can I help you?" Rose asked pleasantly. "We need supplies," the man said. "We have just purchased a property outside of town." "We will need quite a lot, actually." Rose spent the next hour helping them assemble their order, which was indeed substantial. They seemed pleased with her service, and the man paid without question. They were just leaving when Xavier returned. "Who was that?" he asked, watching them go. "New property owners. They bought a considerable amount." Rose showed him the invoice, and Xavier's eyebrows rose. "This is the biggest single order we have had in months." He looked at her with unmistakable pride. "Well done. I just gave them what they needed. You did more than that. You made them feel welcome, made sure they got everything. That is good business." He set down the papers he was carrying and turned to face her fully. "Rose, I need to tell you something." The seriousness in his tone made her nervous. "What is it?" Xavier seemed to struggle with his words, unusual for him. "When I hired you, it was because you needed help and I had the means to give it. But these past months it has become more than that. You have become—" He stopped, took a breath. "You have become essential to me. Not just for the business, but personally. I find myself thinking about you when you are not here, looking forward to seeing you every morning, and I realize that somewhere along the way I have fallen in love with you." Rose's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. "Xavier, I know this might be unwelcome," he continued quickly. "I know I am just a freight hauler and you are educated and from a good family. I know you might not feel the same way, but I could not keep it to myself anymore. I love you, Rose, and if you will have me, I would like to marry you. Not because you need security, though I can offer you that, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Joy and fear warred in Rose's chest. "I am from a good family that lost everything," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I have no dowry, Xavier. No money, no property, nothing to bring to a marriage except myself." Xavier stepped closer, his gray eyes intense. "You are the only treasure I want." The simple declaration, delivered with such conviction, broke something open inside Rose. All her careful control, her determination to keep her feelings hidden, crumbled. "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out. "I have been so afraid to say it, afraid I was imagining things, afraid of being foolish. But I love you. I think I started falling in love with you that first day when you gave me a chance." Xavier's face transformed with his smile, and then he was kissing her, his hands gentle on her face, and Rose kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding in for months. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Say yes." "Yes," Rose whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with Margaret Prout and a few of Xavier's business associates as witnesses. Rose wore a new dress that Xavier had insisted on buying her, a soft blue wool that made her eyes look even brighter. Xavier wore his best suit, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared made Margaret cough uncomfortably and the witnesses grin. Xavier had been making arrangements in secret. He had purchased a small house on the outskirts of town, nothing grand but solidly built, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen. When he carried Rose over the threshold that evening, she burst into tears. "What is wrong?" Xavier asked, alarmed. "Nothing is wrong," Rose said, laughing through her tears. "Everything is right. For the first time in so long, everything is right. I have a home. I have you. I never thought I would feel this happy again." Xavier set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands, wiping away her tears with his thumbs. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay happy," he promised, and he kept that promise. Their first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to live together, learning each other's habits and quirks, but the foundation of friendship they had built made everything easier. Rose continued to help at the shop, which thrived under their combined efforts. Xavier proved to be a thoughtful, affectionate husband, surprising her with small gifts, always interested in her thoughts and opinions. Winter came to Victor with a vengeance, bringing snow that piled up in drifts taller than a man. The town slowed down, though the mines kept working. Xavier and Rose would close the shop in the early afternoon and hurry home, where they would build up the fire and spend the long evenings talking, reading, making love in their warm bed while the wind howled outside. It was during one of these evenings in January that Rose realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but now she was certain. She waited until they were lying in bed, Xavier's arm around her shoulders, to tell him, "Xavier, I have news. Good news or bad news? Good news. At least, I think it is good news. I hope you will think so too." He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with concern. "You are worrying me now. What is it?" "I am going to have a baby." Xavier's expression went blank with shock, then slowly transformed into pure joy. "You are sure?" "I am sure." He let out a whoop of excitement, then immediately looked stricken. I am sorry, I should not be so loud. Are you all right? Should you be lying down? Do you need anything? Rose laughed at his sudden solicitousness. I am fine. Women have babies all the time. I am healthy and strong. You are carrying my child, Xavier said with wonder, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. Our child. Rose, I do not have words. Happy words, I hope, the happiest. He kissed her tenderly. I love you so much. I love you too. The months that followed were both wonderful and challenging. Rose experienced morning sickness that was not confined to mornings, exhaustion that hit her like a wall in the afternoons, and 100 other small discomforts. But she also felt a sense of completeness, of purpose, that she had never experienced before. Xavier was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about her doing too much, but Rose found his concern endearing rather than irritating. By April, her pregnancy was obvious, and Rose stopped coming to the shop every day, instead working from home on the books and correspondence. Xavier hired a young man named Peter to help with the heavy work, which freed him up to come home earlier to check on Rose. Spring arrived, melting the massive snowdrifts and turning the streets into rivers of mud. The town came back to life with renewed energy. New prospectors arrived, new businesses opened, and Victor continued its rapid growth. Crawford Freight and Supply prospered along with the town, and Xavier began talking about expanding, maybe opening a second location in nearby Cripple Creek. Rose's time came in late July, a year and a day after she had first arrived in Victor. The labor was long and difficult, attended by the town's doctor and an experienced midwife. Xavier paced outside the bedroom, nearly out of his mind with worry, until finally, as dawn was breaking, he heard the thin wail of a newborn. The midwife opened the door, smiling. You have a son, Mr. Crawford, a big, healthy boy. Xavier rushed in to find Rose exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced, squalling infant. He has got good lungs, she said tiredly. Xavier knelt beside the bed, looking at his son with absolute awe. He is perfect. You are perfect. Rose, His voice cracked with emotion. I know, she said softly, reaching for his hand. I know. They named him James after Xavier's father. He was indeed a healthy baby, strong and alert, with a powerful cry that he was not shy about using. Rose threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she had brought to survival, though the reality of caring for an infant proved more exhausting than she had anticipated. There were nights when she was so tired she cried, days when she felt like she was doing everything wrong. But Xavier was there, steady as always, taking the baby so Rose could sleep, walking the floor at night when James would not settle, supporting her through the difficult moments. They navigated parenthood together, learning as they went. The years that followed were full. Crawford Freight and Supply continued to grow. Xavier did open that second location in Cripple Creek, and it prospered. Rose managed the books for both locations, working from home with James playing at her feet and later, when he was older, helping in ways that were more hindrance than help, but that she treasured anyway. James was 2 when Rose became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she delivered a daughter in the spring of 1885. They named her Caroline, and she was a quieter baby than James had been, with Xavier's gray eyes and Rose's delicate features. Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost miraculous to Rose. She had a husband she loved deeply, 2 healthy children, a comfortable home, and security she had never imagined possible during those desperate first weeks in Victor. Sometimes she would think about that terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but a cloth bag and determination, and she could hardly believe how far she had come. But it was not always easy. Running 2 businesses, Raising 2 young children and maintaining a household required constant effort. There were times when Rose felt overwhelmed, stretched too thin. There were times when she and Xavier argued, usually about money or how much time he was spending at the shops. But they always worked through it, their foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection strong enough to weather the storms. Victor continued to boom through the mid-1880s. The gold kept coming out of the mountains, and the town kept growing. New people arrived constantly, and Rose found herself becoming something of a pillar of the community. She helped organize a church fundraiser, started a lending library in the back of the shop, and mentored other young women who arrived in town alone and desperate, just as she had once been. One evening in the fall of 1886, Rose and Xavier were sitting on their porch, watching the sun set over the mountains while James and Caroline played in the yard. Rose was mending a shirt, and Xavier was going over some invoices, but they were simply enjoying each other's presence. "Do you ever regret it?" Rose asked suddenly. Xavier looked up. "Regret what?" "This, me, all of it. You could have married someone who brought money or property to the marriage. Instead, you got a penniless woman with nothing." Xavier set down his papers and turned to face her fully. "Rose Crawford, I am going to tell you this as many times as I need to for you to believe it. You brought everything I needed. You brought yourself, your strength, your intelligence, your capacity for love. You made my house a home. You gave me children. You are my partner in every sense of the word. I would not trade what we have for all the gold in these mountains." Rose felt tears prick her eyes, as they always did when Xavier said things like that. After 4 years of marriage, his ability to make her feel cherished had not diminished. "I love you. I love you too. Always have, always will." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. James was showing Caroline something in the dirt, probably a bug, and Caroline was shrieking with delight. Rose looked at her family, her life, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. The years continued to pass. James started school, proud and nervous in his new clothes. Caroline learned to read before she was 5, sitting on Rose's lap while Rose pointed out letters and words. The businesses continued to thrive, and Xavier was able to hire managers for both locations, which freed up more of his time to spend with the family. In 1888, Rose became pregnant for the 3rd time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous 2, complicated by her age. She was 30 now, and the demands of caring for 2 active children. But in early 1889, she delivered another son whom they named Henry. He was a small baby, fragile in a way that terrified both Rose and Xavier, but he was a fighter. He survived those precarious first weeks, then months, and eventually grew into a sturdy, laughing child. With 3 children, the house that had once seemed adequately sized now felt cramped. Xavier began making plans to build a larger home, something with enough bedrooms for everyone, and a real dining room where they could host the dinners. Rose had started giving for friends and business associates. The new house was completed in the spring of 1890, a 2-story structure on the edge of town with a view of the mountains. It had 4 bedrooms, a proper parlor, a large kitchen, and even indoor plumbing, which was still a rarity in Victor. Moving into it felt like another milestone, another step away from those desperate early days. Rose was hanging curtains in the parlor one afternoon when she heard a commotion outside. She looked out to see Xavier arriving home in the middle of the day, which was unusual. She went to meet him, concerned. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Xavier was grinning, which eased her worry. "Better than all right. I just closed a deal to supply 3 new mines that are opening up outside of town. It is the biggest contract we have ever had." Rose, we are going to need to expand again. Rose felt a surge of pride in her husband who had built all of this from nothing. That is wonderful. We should celebrate. We should. Xavier swept her into his arms and spun her around, making her laugh. The children came running at the sound, and soon it was a family celebration, with everyone talking over each other in excitement. That night, after the children were asleep, Rose and Xavier sat in their new parlor, savoring the quiet. Xavier had poured them each a small glass of whiskey, a rare indulgence. "To us," Xavier said, raising his glass. "To us," Rose echoed, clinking her glass against his. They drank, and then Xavier pulled Rose close, tucking her against his side. "Do you remember that first day you came into the shop?" he asked. "Of course I remember. I was so desperate for work I would have done anything. I knew right then that you were special. The way you did not hesitate to help with that crate, even in your fancy traveling dress. The way you looked me straight in the eye and asked for work. You had courage. I was terrified. Brave and terrified are not opposites. You can be both." He kissed the top of her head. "I am so grateful you walked into my shop that day. I am grateful you gave me a chance." They sat in comfortable silence, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Rose thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Philadelphia society to a mining town in Colorado, from destitute to prosperous, from alone to surrounded by love. It had not been an easy road, but it had been worth every difficult step. The 1890s brought continued growth and change to Victor. The town was solidly established now, with schools, churches, businesses, and a real sense of community. The Crawfords were respected members of that community, known for their successful businesses and their generosity. Xavier gave credit to miners when they were between claims, and Rose continued to help women who arrived in town without resources, remembering what it had been like to be in their position. James grew into a serious, studious boy who loved books and showed an aptitude for mathematics. Caroline was more outgoing, with a gift for drawing and an easy way with people. Henry was the adventurous one, always climbing trees and exploring, giving Rose constant heart attacks with his fearlessness. In 1893, when Rose was 35, she became pregnant for a fourth and final time. This pregnancy was difficult from the start, and Rose spent much of it on bed rest. Xavier was beside himself with worry, but Rose was determined. She had survived too much to let this defeat her. The baby, another daughter, was born in early 1894. They named her Margaret, after the cousin who had given Rose shelter when she first arrived, despite her prickly nature. Margaret Prout had passed away the previous year, and Rose had been surprised to find herself genuinely mourning the difficult woman who had nevertheless helped her when she needed it most. Little Margaret was a healthy baby, and Rose recovered well from the birth, though Xavier made her promise that 4 children were enough. Rose agreed, exhausted but content with her family. The turn of the century found the Crawfords firmly established as one of Victor's prominent families. Crawford Freight and Supply had locations in Victor, Cripple Creek, and now also in Colorado Springs. Xavier had managers running the day-to-day operations, though he still kept close oversight. Rose handled the overall finances and strategy, her educated mind and natural business sense proving invaluable. James, at 17, was preparing to go to college in Denver, planning to study engineering. Caroline, at 15, had declared her intention to become an artist, which scandalized some of the more traditional townsfolk, but delighted her parents. Henry, at 11, was still the wild one, more interested in exploring the mountains than sitting in a classroom. Little Margaret, at 6, was the baby of the family and shamelessly spoiled by everyone. One evening in the summer of 1900, Rose and Xavier were sitting on the porch of their home, much as they had so many times before. The children were inside, supposedly doing homework but probably arguing or playing. It was just the two of them, watching the familiar sunset paint the mountains gold. 20 years, Xavier said suddenly. Rose looked at him questioningly. It has been almost 20 years since you walked into my shop. 20 years since you asked for work with your chin up and your hands shaking. Rose smiled at the memory. Has it really been that long? It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. We have built a good life, Xavier said, reaching for her hand. His hair was gray at the temples now, and there were lines around his eyes, but to Rose he was as handsome as he had been at 26. Better than I ever imagined. We have, Rose agreed. Her own dark hair had threads of silver now, and her hands showed the years of work, but she felt more beautiful than she had as a desperate 22-year-old, because now she knew what it was to be truly loved, truly valued. Xavier, can I tell you something? Always. That day I came to Victor, I thought my life was over. I thought I had lost everything that mattered. But really, it was just beginning. Everything I lost made room for everything I gained. You, our children, this life we built. I would not change a single thing. Xavier brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. You said you had no dowry, but you brought me everything that mattered. You brought love, partnership, family. You are still the only treasure I want. Rose felt the tears come, happy tears that she had learned to embrace over the years. She leaned into her husband's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close as they watched the sun dip below the mountains. Inside the house, their children's voices rose in argument over something trivial. Xavier sighed. I should probably go referee that. In a minute, Rose said, not ready to let go of this moment. Let us just sit here a little longer. So they did. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life from nothing but determination and love, who had weathered storms and celebrated triumphs together. They sat and watched the night come in over the mountains, content in the knowledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, as they had faced everything else for the past 20 years. The story of Rose and Xavier Crawford became something of a legend in Victor, told to newcomers as an example of what was possible in this wild country if you had courage and were lucky enough to find true love. But to Rose and Xavier, it was simply their life, precious and hard-won and infinitely valuable. As the stars came out over the Colorado mountains, Rose thought about that terrified young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but a cloth bag and a hope. She wished she could tell that girl that everything would be all right, that the man who would give her a chance would become the love of her life, that the desperation would give way to joy. But then again, maybe the journey was necessary. Maybe you had to know loss before you could truly appreciate what you had found. Xavier stirred beside her. Cold, he asked, a little. Let us go inside. I think there is pie left from dinner. Rose laughed. You and your sweet tooth. You love my sweet tooth. I love you, she corrected. That too. They stood, Xavier keeping his arm around Rose's waist as they walked to the door. Before going inside, Rose paused and looked back at the mountains, dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. This beautiful, harsh country had taken her in when she had nowhere else to go. It had tested her, pushed her to her limits, but it had also given her everything. Thank you, she whispered to the night. For what? Xavier asked. For this, for us, for everything. Xavier smiled and kissed her forehead. Come on, let us go get that pie before the kids eat it all. They went inside together, into the warmth and light and noise of their home, their family, their life. And if somewhere in the house one of the children was indeed eating the last of the pie, well, that was just part of the adventure too. The years continued their steady march forward. James graduated from college and shocked everyone by deciding to return to Victor rather than staying in Denver. He had his father's practical nature and his mother's head for figures, and he joined the family business with enthusiasm, bringing new ideas and energy that helped Crawford Freight and Supply continue to grow and adapt. Caroline did pursue her art, but in a way that was uniquely hers. She started painting signs for businesses throughout Victor and the surrounding towns, and her distinctive style became sought after. She married a fellow artist in 1903, a kind man named Daniel who treated her like the treasure she was, and Rose watched her daughter's wedding with tears of joy, remembering her own simple ceremony. Henry eventually found his calling as a surveyor, combining his love of the mountains with practical work. He mapped new mining claims and helped plan roads through the difficult terrain. He married a sensible woman named Sarah in 1905, and they built a cabin up in the mountains where Henry was happiest. Margaret, the baby, grew up with advantages her older siblings had not had, but Rose and Xavier made sure she understood the value of hard work and compassion. She became a teacher, working in Victor's growing school system, and found fulfillment in educating the next generation of children in this mountain town. As Rose moved into her 40s and then her 50s, she found herself reflecting more on how far she had come. The scared young woman who had arrived with nothing seemed like a different person entirely. Rose had become confident, capable, respected in the community. But she never forgot those desperate early days, and she made sure that any woman who came to Victor in difficult circumstances had someone to turn to. Xavier aged alongside her, his dark hair going fully silver, his body showing the years of hard physical work, but his eyes still lit up when he looked at her, and his love never wavered. They had grown old together, accumulating memories and grandchildren, building something that would outlast them. In 1910, when Rose was 52 and Xavier 54, they celebrated their 28th wedding anniversary with a party that seemed to include half of Victor. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, and friends and business associates toasted their long and successful marriage. During the party, Xavier's old friend Samuel gave a speech. "I have known Xavier Crawford for 25 years, he said, raising his glass. "And I have never seen him as happy as he has been since he married Rose. They are proof that the best things in life are not gold or silver, but the people we love and the lives we build together." There was a chorus of agreement and another round of toasts. Rose, overwhelmed with emotion, squeezed Xavier's hand under the table. He squeezed back, his eyes meeting hers with the same depth of feeling they had held 28 years ago when he had told her she was the only treasure he wanted. Later, when the party had wound down and the grandchildren had been taken home by their parents, Rose and Xavier sat in their parlor, exhausted but happy. Rose's feet ached from all the standing and Xavier's knee was bothering him, a lingering injury from a long-ago accident, but neither complained. "That was a good party," Xavier said. "It was perfect," Rose agreed. 28 years. Where did the time go?" "Into this," Rose gestured vaguely at everything around them. "Into building, growing, living." Xavier pulled her close, and Rose rested her head on his shoulder, the position so familiar she could have done it with her eyes closed. They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had spent nearly 3 decades learning each other inside and out, who could communicate as much with silence as with words. "I would do it all again," Xavier said quietly. "Every single moment, even the hard parts. As long as it ended with us here like this." "Me too," Rose whispered. "Me too." As they sat there in the lamplight, surrounded by photographs of their children and grandchildren, mementos of their life together, Rose felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had learned that sometimes losing everything was the path to finding what really mattered. She had learned that love was not about dowries or social status or material wealth. It was about partnership, respect, shared dreams, and the quiet moments at the end of long days when you sat together and simply existed in each other's presence. The years after 1910 brought more changes. Victor's gold boom began to slow, though the town remained viable. Some people left for other opportunities, but the Crawfords stayed. This was home now, in a way Philadelphia had never been. The businesses adapted, diversifying beyond just mining supplies to serve the town's evolving needs. Xavier retired in 1915, handing over full control to James, who ran things with the same integrity and skill his father had shown. Xavier spent his retirement years working in the garden he had started, taking long walks in the mountains, and spoiling his growing number of grandchildren. Rose also stepped back from the day-to-day business operations, though she remained a trusted advisor. She focused on her charitable work, on her family, and on simply enjoying the life she had built. She took up painting alongside Caroline, discovering a talent she had not known she possessed. She wrote letters to her grandchildren, full of stories and advice and love. In the summer of 1920, Rose and Xavier celebrated their 38th anniversary quietly, just the two of them. They were older now, both in their 60s, moving more slowly, tiring more easily. But the love between them was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger, tempered by years of shared experience. They took a picnic up to a meadow outside of town, a place they had discovered years ago and returned to often. Xavier spread out the blanket, moving stiffly, and Rose unpacked the food she had prepared. They ate and talked about everything and nothing, watching clouds drift across the blue sky. "You know what I thought the first time I saw you?" Xavier asked suddenly. Rose smiled. "What?" "I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. And then you spoke, and I thought you were too good for a place like Victor. Too refined, too educated. I never imagined you would stay." "I almost did not stay. If you had not given me that job, I do not know what would have happened to me. I gave you a job because I needed help. I fell in love with you because of who you are." Xavier reached for her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You made me better, Rose. You made everything better." "We made each other better," Rose corrected gently. "That is what love does." They sat in their meadow holding hands, two people who had found each other when they both needed finding, who had built a life of meaning and purpose and joy. Around them, wildflowers bloomed in the mountain sunshine, and in the distance, Victor spread out below, the town that had been the backdrop for their love story. As the afternoon light began to slant toward evening, they packed up their picnic and made their way slowly back down the mountain. Xavier helped Rose over the rough spots, and she steadied him when his knee bothered him. They had been taking care of each other for nearly 40 years now, and they would continue to do so for whatever time they had left. The years that followed were good ones, full of family gatherings and quiet moments, of watching grandchildren grow and great-grandchildren arrive. Rose and Xavier grew older gracefully, supporting each other through the inevitable aches and pains of aging, celebrating each day they had together. Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1925, at the age of 69. Rose was devastated by the loss of her partner, her love, her other half. But she took comfort in knowing they had made the most of the time they had, that they had loved fully and completely, that they had built something lasting. Rose lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories about Xavier and their early days in Victor, making sure the next generation understood the values they had built their life on. She passed away in 1930, at the age of 72, and was buried beside Xavier in the Victor Cemetery, overlooking the mountains they had both loved. On her headstone, at her children's request, was inscribed, Rose Garrison Crawford, 1858-1930, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, you are the only treasure I want. The story of Rose and Xavier Crawford lived on in Victor, passed down through generations as an example of true love and the possibilities that existed in this wild country for those brave enough to seize them. Their descendants continue to live in Victor and the surrounding area, carrying forward the legacy of hard work, compassion, and love that Rose and Xavier had established. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light slanted across the mountains in just the right way, people walking past the old Crawford house, now occupied by great-grandchildren, would swear they could feel something in the air, a sense of presence, of enduring love. The house had been built on a foundation of determination and devotion, and that foundation remained strong, just as the love between Rose and Xavier had remained strong through all the years of their life together. They had started with nothing but need and opportunity. They had built an empire of sorts, not of gold or silver, but of family, community, and lasting love. In the end, that proved to be the most valuable treasure of all, the kind that could not be taken away by creditors or circumstances, the kind that lasted beyond a single lifetime, rippling forward through generations. And somewhere, if such things were possible, Rose and Xavier were together still, sitting on a porch watching the sunset over the mountains, content in each other's presence, their love eternal and unshakable, a light that would never dim. They had found each other against all odds, two souls who fit together perfectly, and nothing, not even death itself, could change that fundamental truth. Their story was complete, a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the Wild West, full of hardship and triumph, loss and redemption, but most of all, full of love. The kind of love that transforms lives, that builds legacies, that endures. Rose had arrived in Victor with nothing but a cloth bag and determination. She had left behind a legacy that would last for generations, all because a cowboy had seen past her lack of dowry to the treasure she truly was. And in seeing her worth, Xavier had found his own purpose, his own happiness, his own treasure. They had been each other's salvation, each other's home, each other's greatest adventure. And that, in the end, was the most beautiful story of all,